Picture this. August 2nd, 216 BC. Southern Italy. You are a Roman legionnaire, standing in the center of 80,000 men. The largest army Rome has ever assembled. The morning sun beats down on your bronze helmet like a forge hammer. Sweat pools inside your leather armor. Your throat is dust. You've been standing in formation for 2 hours, shield pressed against the back of the man in front of you, the man behind you crushing against your spine. The air smells of olive oil, unwashed bodies, and something else. Fear, sharp and metallic. Across the plain of Cannae, you see them. Hannibal's army, barely 50,000 men, outnumbered, outflanked, trapped with their backs to a river. Your consuls promised this would be Rome's final victory, the day they would erase the Carthaginian threat forever. The math is simple, the outcome inevitable. Then the drums begin. Your formation starts moving forward, not marching, but compressing, thousands of bodies pushing inward like a human vice. You can't breathe, can't turn your head. The man next to you whispers a prayer to Mars. Ahead, you see Hannibal's center buckle and retreat. Victory. It's happening. Except it isn't. The pressure intensifies. You're not advancing anymore. You're being funneled, compressed, and then you hear it. A sound like thunder coming from behind, from your flanks, from everywhere. Carthaginian cavalry slamming into your rear like a collapsing building. You realize in that moment that you are not in a battle formation. You are in a killing box. This is Cannae, the day Hannibal Barca turned warfare into surgical butchery. The day he killed 70,000 Roman soldiers in a single afternoon using nothing but geometry, psychology, and absolute genius. The day Rome learned that some nightmares don't end when you wake up. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand how one man shattered the Roman Republic's invincibility and brought the ancient world's superpower to its knees, we must strip away 2,000 years of romantic mythology. History tells us that Hannibal was a barbarian general who got lucky a few times before being defeated by superior Roman civilization. That is a lie told by the victors, repeated by Hollywood, and accepted by millions who have never examined the actual records. Here's the truth. In 218 BC, Carthage and Rome were locked in a death struggle for control of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War had ended 23 years earlier with Carthage humiliated, bankrupt, and stripped of Sicily. Rome had become drunk on its own power, convinced of its divine right to rule. They believed their military system, the legion, was unbeatable. They believed their Senate's collective wisdom surpassed any single general. They believed their citizen soldiers fought with moral superiority that would always triumph. Hannibal Barca believed none of these things. Born in 247 BC, Hannibal was not just a general. He was a child raised on hatred. His father, Hannibal Barca, had forced a 9-year-old boy to swear an oath before the Carthaginian gods, an oath to never be a friend of Rome, to dedicate his life to its destruction. This was not rhetoric. This was a blood vow that would define every decision Hannibal made for the next 4 decades. By 218 BC, Hannibal commanded Carthaginian forces in Hispania, modern Spain. He was 29 years old. Rome, sensing threat in Carthage's expansion, issued an ultimatum: surrender or face war. Hannibal's response was to do something Rome considered impossible. He would invade Italy, not by sea, where Roman naval power dominated, but by land, through the Pyrenees Mountains, across the Rhone River, over the Alps, in late autumn, with war elephants, cavalry, and 40,000 infantry. Military analysts of the time calculated this march would cost him everything. They were right. By the time Hannibal descended into the Pavelli in northern Italy, he had lost half his army to exposure, starvation, and alpine tribes. But he was in Italy, on Roman soil, with an army of survivors who had done the impossible. Rome's Senate laughed. They sent a small force north to crush this foolish invader. At the Trebia River in December 218 BC, Hannibal destroyed them, using the river's icy waters and hidden ambush positions to slaughter 20,000 Romans. The Senate stopped laughing. They sent another army. At Lake Trasimene in June 217 BC, Hannibal ambushed them in morning fog, driving 15,000 Romans into the lake. Where they drowned in their armor, 2 panicked to remove it. Another 15,000 died on the shore. The consul leading them, Gaius Flaminius, was decapitated. Rome was now terrified. For the first time in its history, the Republic appointed a dictator, Fabius Maximus, who adopted a strategy of avoidance. Shadow Hannibal, deny him battle, starve him out. It worked tactically, but politically, Rome was humiliated. Their fields burned, their allies defected, their pride destroyed. The Senate had enough of defensive cowardice. In the summer of 216 BC, they elected 2 consuls, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, and gave them a mandate: find Hannibal, destroy him, restore Roman honor. They raised the largest army in Roman history: 8 full legions, 80,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry. The entire military might of the Republic, concentrated into a single overwhelming force that would crush the Carthaginian upstart through sheer numerical superiority. The Romans marched south, hunting Hannibal. They found him near the town of Cannae, in Apulia, his back to the Aufidus River, trapped, outnumbered nearly 2-1, facing the combined fury of Rome's legions in open terrain, exactly the kind of set-piece battle where the legion system excelled. By all calculated metrics, what happened here should have been impossible. The Roman camp on the night of August 1st, 216 BC, was a study in confidence bordering on delusion. Consul Varro addresses officers with the kind of speech that sounds brilliant in the moment and suicidal in hindsight. Tomorrow we end this. Hannibal has run out of tricks, run out of terrain, run out of time. He faces Roman iron, Roman discipline, and Roman wrath. We will not outmaneuver him. We will break him with pure force. The plan was brutally simple. Mass the infantry in the center, deeper than usual, not the traditional Roman triple line, but a compact column of overwhelming depth. Smash through Hannibal's center through sheer pushing power. Use the flanking cavalry to hold off Carthaginian horsemen long enough for the infantry to do its work. It was not a sophisticated plan. It didn't need to be. Rome had the numbers, the discipline, the righteous fury of an empire that had never lost on its own soil. Consul Paulus was less certain. A veteran commander, he understood that Hannibal had not survived this long through conventional thinking. He argued for delay, for better ground, for caution. The 2 consuls alternated command each day, a Roman tradition designed to prevent military dictatorship, but which created catastrophic strategic schizophrenia. August 2nd was Varro's day to command. He gave the order at dawn: form ranks. Today we exterminate Carthage. Across the river, in the Carthaginian camp, Hannibal stood before his assembled officers, a coalition army of Iberians, Gauls, Africans, and Numidians who shared nothing except loyalty to the man who had led them across mountains and through hell. Hannibal did not give a rousing speech. He did not appeal to the gods or promise glory. Instead, he sketched lines in the dirt with a stick, showing his commanders exactly what would happen in the next 6 hours. The Romans will push our center, he said, his voice calm, analytical. Let them. Our Gauls and Iberians will form a convex line, a bulge toward the enemy. When the Romans hit it, they will push it back. They will think they are winning. Their entire formation will compress inward, chasing that victory. He drew 2 curved arrows from the flanks. While they do this, Hasdrubal will take our cavalry, superior in quality and mobility, and destroy their horsemen on both wings. Then he will circle behind the Roman infantry. His finger drew a circle around the Roman position. Our African veterans, hidden on the flanks, will wheel inward. The Romans will be surrounded, compressed, unable to use their numbers. And then he looked up at his officers. We kill them all. One of his commanders, a grizzled Gallic chieftain, asked the obvious question: what if our center breaks before the cavalry finishes its work? Hannibal's expression did not change. Then we all die, which is why our center will not break. Because the men holding it know that if they run, there is nowhere to run to. We are in the heart of Roman Italy, surrounded by enemies. Our only path home is through their corpses. This wasn't just tactics, it was psychology. Hannibal understood something that Roman commanders, with their citizen soldier tradition, often missed. Professional soldiers fight differently when retreat means death. They become not men, but mechanisms of survival. As the sun rose on August 2nd, 216 BC, two armies faced each other across a dusty plain. One believed in numerical superiority and divine favor. The other believed in geometry and the inevitability of physics. Only one of them was right. The morning began with dust. 80,000 Roman soldiers do not move silently. Their hobnailed sandals, caligae, churned the dry Apulian soil in the clouds that hung in the hot air like fog. Each legionnaire carried approximately 40 pounds equipment. A scidum shield weighing 22 pounds, a gladius short sword, 2 peel-off throwing spears, a bronze helmet, and chainmail or plate armor. Multiply that weight by tens of thousands, and you begin to understand the sheer physical mass that Rome was deploying. The Roman formation was a departure from standard doctrine. Normally, legions deployed in 3 lines: hostati in front, principes in the middle, triarii veterans in the rear, with spacing that allowed maneuverability and rotation of fresh troops. Today, Varro had compressed that spacing, creating a dense column 36 men deep in the center. The formation was half a mile wide, but packed with suffocating density. The logic was simple: become an unstoppable battering ram. Use mass and momentum to simply run over the enemy center. The physics, however, told a different story. Human beings in formation cannot push indefinitely. Studies of ancient warfare mechanics reveal that men in the rear ranks can exert forward pressure, but those in the front ranks must actually fight, thrusting swords, holding shields, stepping over bodies. The deeper the formation, the less effective the rear ranks become. Men 20 ranks back are essentially trapped, unable to fight, able only to add their weight to a human press that becomes increasingly immobile. Hannibal understood this. Varro did not. On the Carthaginian side, the formation was a masterpiece of tactical geometry. In the center, Hannibal places Gallic and Iberian infantry, roughly 20,000 men, in a convex arc that bulged toward the Romans. These were not his best troops. They were brave, fierce, but less disciplined than his African veterans. They wore minimal armor. Many fought bare-chested, with only shields and long swords. They were lighter, faster, and they were bait. On both flanks of the central arc, hidden slightly behind, Hannibal positioned his African infantry, 12,000 veteran soldiers who had been fighting for Carthage for years. These men wore Roman armor, scavenged from previous victories. They carried Roman swords. They had trained in Roman tactics. They were, in essence, better Romans than Rome's own legions. On the far left flank, Hannibal placed his Iberian and Gallic heavy cavalry, 8,000 horsemen under the command of his brother Hasdrubal. On the right, his Numidian light cavalry, 2,000 riders known for hit-and-run harassment. The Roman cavalry, 6,000 men split between both flanks, were citizen horsemen, wealthy enough to afford mounts but not professional cavalry. They were decent. Against Hannibal's cavalry, they were lambs facing wolves. At approximately 9 a.m., the Battle of Cannae began with a cavalry charge. Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry slammed into the Roman left wing with horrifying violence. This was not the elegant cavalry charge of Hollywood films. This was 1,000-pound animals colliding at 20 miles per hour with men and other horses, a physics equation written in broken bones and trampled flesh. The sound, hooves on packed earth, the screaming of horses, the crunch of bodies crushed beneath weight, was described by later historians as like buildings collapsing. The Roman cavalry broke almost immediately, not out of cowardice, but out of the simple reality that they were facing superior riders on superior horses using superior tactics. Hasdrubal's men drove them from the field in less than 15 minutes, pursuing them far enough to ensure they would not return, then wheeling back toward the main battle. On the right flank, the Numidians engaged the Roman cavalry in a different kind of fight, skirmishing, feinting, drawing them out, refusing decisive contact. It was harassment warfare, designed not to win but to occupy, to keep those Roman horsemen from reinforcing the center. And in the center, the meat grinder began. The Roman infantry advanced at a steady pace, a wall of shields half a mile wide, moving forward like a slow-motion avalanche. The front ranks broke into a jog, then a run in the final 50 yards. They collided with the Carthaginian center with a sound that witnesses later described as thunder. This is where the movie version ends and the engineering begins. When two infantry formations collide, the result is not immediate slaughter. It is compression. The front ranks press shields together, creating a shoving match where leverage, footing, and continuous pressure determine who gives ground. Men in the second and third ranks thrust spears over or between the front rank shields. Men in the fourth rank and beyond can only push. The Carthaginian center, Hannibal's deliberate bulge, began to give ground almost immediately. This was the plan. The Gauls and Iberians fought viciously, but slowly retreated, their convex arc bending backward under Roman pressure, transforming from a bulge into a concave pocket. The Romans interpreted this as victory. They pushed harder. The formation compressed further inward, chasing the retreating enemy, eager to complete the breakthrough. Officers shouted encouragement. This was exactly what was supposed to happen. Roman discipline and weight were breaking the enemy. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see from inside the dust and chaos, was the shape of their own formation changing. The Roman army was no longer a line. It was becoming a wedge, pushing deeper and deeper into a pocket, its flanks dangerously exposed and unsupported. On both sides of this penetration, Hannibal's African veterans waited motionless, holding their positions. Hasdrubal's cavalry, having routed the Roman left wing, now thundered back across the battlefield. They did not return to their starting position. Instead, they crossed behind the Carthaginian infantry line and smashed into the Roman cavalry on the opposite flank. The horsemen already being harassed by Numidians. Attacked from two directions, the Roman right-wing cavalry disintegrated. In 30 minutes, Hannibal had achieved total cavalry supremacy. The Romans in the center still believed they were winning. Their front ranks were now 200 yards deep into Carthaginian lines, stabbing and pushing, convinced breakthrough was imminent. The Gauls and Iberians were dying, falling back, but holding barely. And then Hannibal gave the signal. The African infantry on both flanks turned inward and began to march. If the story of impossible odds and tactical genius resonates with you, please give this video a like. It truly helps these stories reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's turning points. Imagine being a Roman soldier in the 20th rank of your formation. You cannot see the enemy. You can barely see the man in front of you. What you can see is dust, thick and choking, turning the midday sun into a dim bronze glow. What you can feel is pressure, the man behind you pushing into your back, the entire weight of formations behind you compressing forward. You've been standing in this pressure cooker for over an hour. Your water skin is empty. Sweat pours down your face, into your eyes, salt stinging. Your shield arm aches. You haven't swung your sword once. You're too far back, too compressed by the bodies around you. But you can hear the front ranks fighting, the grunt of men exerting force, the screams, the wet sounds of metal entering flesh. And you keep pushing forward because that's what you're trained to do, what your centurion is shouting at you to do, what every man around you is doing. Then something changes. The pressure that was coming from in front, resistance, pushback, suddenly comes from the sides. You turn your head and see, through the dust, fresh troops attacking from your left, attacking inward. You think they're reinforcements, but they're wearing Roman armor. It takes your brain a moment to process. These are Hannibal's African troops, wearing captured Roman gear, and they're not reinforcing you. They're trapping you. Panic, in a military formation, is a chemical reaction. One man's fear ignites another's, and then another's, spreading faster than fire in dry grass. Men start pushing backward, trying to retreat, but there's nowhere to go. The men behind them are still pushing forward, unaware of the disaster unfolding at the front. The formation stops advancing. Then it stops moving at all. You are now part of a human mass 80,000 strong, trapped in a space growing smaller by the minute. From Hannibal's perspective, standing on a small rise behind his lines, the battle has transformed into a geometric problem. His center is bent backward into a deep concave curve, like a bowl. The Roman formation has pushed deep into that bowl, creating a dense mass roughly 300 yards wide and 200 yards deep. 80,000 men packed into 6 acres of space. His African veterans have now wheeled inward from both flanks, forming the sides of the box. His center, battered but still fighting, forms the back wall, and Hasdrubal's cavalry, having completed their destruction of Roman horsemen, has now positioned itself behind the Roman formation. The box is complete. What happens next is not a battle. It is industrial-scale butchery. 3 p.m., August 2nd, 216 BC. The temperature is 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The Roman army has been in formation for 6 hours, fighting in close-quarters combat for 3. Dehydration alone has begun to kill men who never felt an enemy blade. Hannibal gives the order, compress. His entire army begins to contract inward, not a charge, not a frontal assault, a slow, methodical tightening of the noose. African infantry on both flanks march in disciplined steps, shields locked, spears out, pushing the Roman formation inward. Cavalry blocks the rear, preventing any escape. The Gallic and Iberian center, bloodied but still fighting, stops retreating and begins to push back. The Roman formation begins to collapse inward on itself. Here is where the physics becomes nightmare. 80,000 men compressed into an ever-shrinking space means that soon most men cannot raise their arms, cannot swing swords, cannot use shields effectively. They are pressed chest to back, shoulder to shoulder, in a density that makes breathing difficult and fighting impossible. The Carthaginians on the perimeter, by contrast, have space, room to thrust spears, room to swing swords, room to step forward over bodies and continue killing. Ancient historians describe mechanics of the slaughter with clinical detail. Carthaginian soldiers would thrust short swords into compressed Roman mass, not at individual targets, but into the human wall, certain that every thrust would find flesh. Men in the interior of the Roman formation died, without ever seeing their killer, stabbed by blades that came from between the bodies pressed around them. The sound was the worst part. Not the sound of battle, clashing metal, war cries, but the sound of suffocation. 80,000 men screaming, not in rage but in terror. Animal sound of humans being crushed and stabbed in darkness, and dust with no possibility of fighting back. Consul Aemilius Paulus died in the center, refusing to flee, sword in hand, surrounded by his bodyguard, who were killed to the last man. Accounts say he took multiple wounds, a spear through the thigh, sword cuts to his arms and chest, and fought until he physically collapsed from blood loss, then was trampled by his own men as the formation disintegrated. Consul Varro, the architect of this disaster, somehow escaped on horseback, one of approximately 70 Roman cavalry, who managed to break through the Carthaginian rear before it fully closed. He would live to face the Senate's fury, but in that moment, he was simply a man fleeing the consequences of his arrogance. The killing continued for 3 more hours, not because the Romans kept fighting, but because it took that long to murder 70,000 men trapped in a space the size of 6 football fields. Some Romans tried to break out through the cavalry at the rear. Hasdrubal's horsemen cut them down, using lances and swords against men too exhausted to defend themselves effectively. Some tried to break through the African infantry lines. They were pushed back into the mass, where they suffocated or were stabbed by comrades in the chaos. Some Romans, realizing death was inevitable, killed themselves, falling on their swords rather than being butchered like animals. Some simply sat down and waited for the end, too dehydrated and exhausted to care anymore. By 6 p.m., as the sun began to descend over the Apulian plain, the Battle of Cannae was over. The battlefield was carpeted with bodies, so many bodies that witnesses described being unable to see the ground. Blood pooled in low areas, forming puddles deep enough that men walking through left bloody footprints for yards afterward. The air smelled of iron, shit, and death, the distinctive stench of ruptured bowels and mass slaughter. 70,000 Roman soldiers dead, approximately 10,000 captured, most of them wounded. Perhaps 10,000 escaped, scattered groups who fled during collapse, finding gaps in the Carthaginian encirclement, running until their legs gave out. Hannibal's losses: approximately 6,000 dead, mostly from his center, the Gauls and Iberians who had held the line and paid the price. 1/10 the Roman casualties. This wasn't battle. This was execution, dressed in the language of tactics. Hannibal had not won through superior numbers. He had won through superior thinking, understanding that warfare is not about bravery or divine favor, but about geometry, psychology, and the brutal physics of human compression. He had turned the Roman legion's greatest strength, its discipline and mass, into a fatal vulnerability. He had weaponized the Romans' own arrogance, letting them push deep into a trap while believing they were winning. He had demonstrated that tactics, properly applied, can overcome numerical disadvantage, so extreme it should have been mathematically impossible. When the dust settled and Carthaginian soldiers walked among the dead, stripping armor and weapons, they found something that would haunt Roman memory forever. The bodies of Roman officers, senators' sons, lying in neat circles, having died fighting back-to-back, refused to surrender even when surrounded and doomed. Rome had lost an entire generation of its aristocracy in a single afternoon. Nearly 80 senators and men of senatorial rank died at Cannae. The Senate, when it reconvened, had to relax property requirements of membership because there weren't enough survivors of the traditional ruling class to fill its benches. The psychological impact was even more devastating than the material loss. Rome, the eternal city, the divinely favored, the unbeatable, had been humiliated on its own soil by a foreign general who had killed their soldiers like pen animals. The immediate hours after Cannae saw scenes that would have been unthinkable the day before. Carthaginian soldiers, themselves exhausted from hours of killing, sat among the bodies and wept, not from grief, from the sheer psychological weight of what they had just done. Killing 70,000 men, even enemies, even in legitimate warfare, breaks something in the human mind. Many Carthaginian soldiers refused to eat that night, unable to stomach food after the slaughter. Hannibal himself walked the battlefield that evening. Ancient accounts describe him as quiet, almost somber. This was not a man celebrating victory. This was a man who understood he had just committed an act of military genius that would echo through history, and that Rome would never, ever forgive. His cavalry commander, Hannibal, famously approached him with a proposal. "Give me the cavalry and I will be in Rome in 5 days. You will dine on the capital before they even know I'm coming." The city was 250 miles northwest, defended by minimal garrison forces, its best legions dead on this field. Rome itself was vulnerable. Hannibal refused. Hannibal's response has been recorded by multiple historians. "You know how to win a battle, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use a victory. Was this the fatal mistake that cost Carthage the war?" Historians have debated for 2 millennia. But Hannibal's reasoning was sound. His army was exhausted, deep in enemy territory, without siege equipment capable of breaking Rome's walls. Taking Rome required more than just arriving. It required a siege infrastructure he didn't possess. More importantly, Hannibal understood that destroying Rome's army was not the same as destroying Rome. The Republic was not built on a single military force. It was built on a network of alliances, colonies, and Italian allies who could be peeled away, isolated, and turned against Rome. That was his strategy. Not a single knockout blow, but death by 1,000 cuts. In Rome, the news arrived 2 days later. A rider, one of the survivors, burst into the Senate chamber with a message that would later be immortalized in Roman history. "We have been defeated in a great battle." The Senate's response reveals everything about Roman character. They did not surrender, did not negotiate, did not even consider peace terms. Instead, they declared a day of mourning, then immediately began raising new legions. They pulled men from the reserves, those too old or too young for normal service. They armed slaves with the promise of freedom. They melted down temple decorations to forge new weapons. Rome had lost 70,000 men and responded by preparing to send 100,000 more into the field. The psychological trauma, however, could not be legislated away. For years afterward, Roman mothers terrified disobedient children with a simple phrase, "Hannibal ad portas," Hannibal is at the gates. The name became synonymous with inevitable doom, unstoppable horror. the nightmare that consumed armies and broke the minds of generals. But here's a tactical lesson that makes Cannae more than just a massacre. Hannibal won because he understood warfare as a system of cause and effect, not a contest of valor. He knew the Romans would deploy with superior numbers, so he created a battle plan that neutralized numbers through compression. He knew Romans valued frontal assault and breaking enemy centers, so he gave them a center designed to bend, not break, luring them deep into a trap. He knew Roman cavalry was weak, so he achieved cavalry dominance first, enabling the encirclement that made everything else possible. Every element of his plan depended on the Romans doing exactly what their training, culture, and arrogance dictated they would do. He didn't defeat Rome through innovation. He defeated Rome by understanding Rome better than Rome understood itself. This is a lesson that military academies still teach. Cannae is not studied because it was bloody. Many battles killed more people. It is studied because it was perfect. A complete execution of a complex tactical plan against a numerically superior enemy, resulting in near total annihilation. The battle plan of Cannae has been attempted hundreds of times since. Few succeeded. The most notable success came 2,131 years later, in 1944, when Soviet forces used Hannibalic double envelopment tactics to destroy German Army Group Center, an encirclement that killed or captured 450,000 German soldiers and broke the Wehrmacht's back on the Eastern Front. Even in modern warfare, with radically different technology, the principles Hannibal demonstrated at Cannae remain valid. Isolate enemy strengths, exploit predictable behavior, achieve local superiority at decisive points, and use maneuver to turn enemy mass into vulnerability. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who values the deep, often overlooked stories that define who we are. Please make sure you're subscribed and have the bell notification turned on. I have a lot more forgotten history to uncover with you, but Cannae was not the end. It was the beginning of Rome's long nightmare. In the immediate aftermath, dozens of Italian cities and tribes had been allied with Rome, watching for decades as Rome's power grew, resenting their subjugation. Saw Cannae as proof that Rome was not invincible. They defected to Hannibal. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, opened its gates to the Carthaginian army. Tarentum, with its critical harbor, joined him. Syracuse and Sicily revolted against Roman control. For the next 13 years, Hannibal would remain in Italy, undefeated, a permanent threat that tied down Roman resources and will. He never lost another major battle on Italian soil. Rome never again dared to face him in open combat under his chosen conditions. But Rome also never surrendered. This is where Roman character, that stubborn, almost pathological refusal to accept defeat, became decisive. The Senate, after Cannae, adopted the Fabian strategy that had been mocked before. Shadow Hannibal, avoid battle, slowly recapture defected cities, cut his supply lines, and wait for him to weaken. It worked, but only because Rome could absorb losses that would have destroyed any other ancient state. After Cannae, Rome raised new armies, legions upon legions, and sent them not against Hannibal directly, but against the supply sources and allies. They besieged Capua for 2 years until it fell, then executed its leadership. They retook southern Italian cities one by one, crucifying those who had defected. Hannibal, meanwhile, was slowly being starved. Carthage's government, divided and incompetent, sent minimal reinforcements. His brother Hasdrubal attempted to cross the Alps with a relief army in 207 BC, but was intercepted and killed at the Battle of Mataurus before he could link up with Hannibal. When Hannibal learned of his brother's death, Hasdrubal's severed head was thrown into his camp by Romans. Witnesses say he simply stated, "I see the fate of Carthage." In 203 BC, Hannibal was recalled to North Africa to defend Carthage itself. The Romans, under the young general Scipio Africanus, a survivor of Cannae who had studied Hannibal's tactics and learned from them, had taken the war to Carthaginian territory. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Hannibal faced Scipio in his only major defeat. It was not a crushing loss. Hannibal's tactics were still brilliant. But Scipio had learned Hannibal's lessons. He achieved cavalry superiority. He avoided Hannibal's center trap. He turned Hannibalic tactics against their creator. Carthage surrendered. The Second Punic War ended with Rome victorious. Carthage reduced to a client state, and Hannibal exiled. But Rome never forgot, never forgave. For the next 19 years, Hannibal wandered the Mediterranean, serving various kingdoms as a military advisor, always one step ahead of Roman assassins. In 183 BC, cornered by Roman agents in Bithynia, modern Turkey, the 64-year-old general took poison rather than be captured. His last words, according to tradition, "Let us relieve the Romans of their anxiety. They are too impatient to wait for an old man to die." Even in death, he mocked them. The long-term impact of Hannibal's invasion rippled through centuries. Rome's experience against him transformed Roman military culture. The psychological trauma of Cannae made Rome obsessed with preparedness, with never again being caught vulnerable. This paranoia would drive Roman expansion for the next 400 years, conquering everything around them to ensure no enemy could ever threaten Italy again. The Roman legion evolved after Hannibal. The flexible manipulator system that had failed at Cannae was reformed by Marius a century later, creating the more adaptable cohort system. Roman cavalry improved dramatically. Roman generals studied Hannibal's campaigns the way modern officers study Napoleon, as the gold standard of tactical brilliance. Ironically, Hannibal's greatest victory ensured Carthage's ultimate destruction. Rome never trusted Carthage again, never forgave. 50 years after Hannibal's death, in 146 BC, Rome destroyed Carthage entirely, burned the city, enslaved its population, and sowed the earth with salt. The elder Cato had ended every Senate speech with "Carthago delendes," Carthage must be destroyed. Rome listened. If Hannibal had been less brilliant, if Cannae had been a conventional battle Rome merely lost, perhaps Carthage could have negotiated peace and survived. But Hannibal humiliated Rome so completely that forgiveness became impossible. His genius signed his nation's death warrant. 2,000 years later, Hannibal's name still echoes through military academies, strategy rooms, and the human imagination. Not because he won, he lost, eventually, but because he demonstrated something fundamental about human conflict that we still grapple with. Discipline beats numbers. Every time, without exception, Cannae proved that 50,000 men who understand their role in a coherent system will destroy 80,000 who simply possess strength. The Roman legions at Cannae were brave. They were well-equipped. They were motivated. And they died in droves because bravery without tactics is just expensive suicide. Planning beats improvisation. Hannibal's victory was not the result of battlefield inspiration. It was the execution of a plan developed before the first sword was drawn, a plan that accounted for Roman psychology, Roman tactics, Roman arrogance. He knew what they would do before they knew themselves. Patience beats aggression. The Fabian strategy that eventually defeated Hannibal was not cowardly. It was strategic patience that understood time itself can be a weapon. Rome won the Second Punic War not because they defeated Hannibal in battle, but because they refused to surrender when any rational calculation said they should. But here is the darker truth that Cannae whispers across the centuries. Genius without logistics fails. Hannibal won every battle and lost a war, because warfare is not just tactics. It's sustainment, supply, and political will. He could destroy Roman armies, but he could not destroy Roman determination. The Roman Republic, for all its military failures against Hannibal, possessed something that Carthage lacked: institutional resilience, the ability to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting, to raise new armies from the ashes of destroyed legions, to maintain political unity when any reasonable nation would have sued for peace. This is what broke Hannibal. Not a more brilliant general, not a tactical defeat, but the slow, grinding reality that he could win battles forever, and Rome would simply produce more soldiers. There's a tragic grandeur to Hannibal's story. A man who swore childhood vengeance against Rome, who crossed the Alps to fulfill that oath, who killed more Roman soldiers than any general in history, and who died in exile his nation destroyed, his life's work undone. He is remembered not as a villain, though Rome tried to paint him that way, but as the nightmare that taught Rome how to become an empire. Every Roman general after Cannae understood that brilliance matters, that arrogance kills, that the enemy who seems trapped might be the one setting the trap. Hannibal ad Portus stopped being a warning about a specific general. It became a warning about complacency itself. Modern military theorists still debate Cannae, Not just what happened, but whether it can happen again. In an era of mechanized warfare, satellite reconnaissance, and real-time communication, can one force still achieve such total tactical surprise and encirclement? History suggests yes. When one side understands the system and the other relies on assumptions, when tactics are subordinated to mathematical certainty and psychological manipulation, the strong can still be destroyed by the prepared. Hannibal Barca did not just win a battle. He created a template for how intellect defeats force, how planning defeats strength, how one brilliant mind can rewrite the rules of warfare itself. And Rome never forgot. Every triumph arch they built afterward, every military manual they wrote, every general they trained, all of it carried the shadow of the man who almost broke them. That is the ultimate legacy of Cannae. Not the body count, not the tactical perfection, but the knowledge that invincibility is a myth, that empires bleed, and that one person with a plan can change the world, even if that world ultimately destroys them in return. Today, in the hills near the small Italian town of Cannae, there is a memorial, not grand, not ostentatious, but there, a stone marker commemorating the 70,000 who died in a single afternoon, 2,239 years ago. Visitors walk the terrain, the gentle hills, the plain, the river valley, and try to imagine it. Try to picture 130,000 men locked in mortal combat. Try to understand how mathematics and psychology converge to create industrial-scale slaughter with Bronze Age weapons. Most cannot. The scale defies imagination. The genius defies easy explanation. But stand there at sunset, when the light turns the dusk golden, and the shadows lengthen across the plain, and perhaps you can feel it, the echo of something that changed history, the day an empire learned it was mortal. Hannibal Barca spent 16 years in Italy. He won every major engagement. He killed tens of thousands of Roman soldiers. He shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and terrified a generation. And Rome responded by becoming more Roman, more disciplined, more relentless, more willing to absorb punishment and continue fighting. They became the empire that would dominate the Mediterranean for 600 years, built not on invincibility, but on the refusal to accept defeat even when defeat seemed inevitable. That is Hannibal's true legacy, not the battles he won, but the empire he forced Rome to become, the nightmare that taught the eternal lesson. What doesn't kill you makes you absolutely ruthless. And somewhere in whatever afterlife exists for generals who defied gods and empires, perhaps Hannibal smiles at that irony. He wanted to destroy Rome. Instead, he made it immortal. If you enjoyed this deep dive into tactical genius and the battle that redefined warfare, please help us win our own battle against the algorithm by hitting that like button and subscribing. It really does make a difference. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you could sit down with Hannibal after Cannae and ask him one question about his plan, what would it be? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and check out the video on your screen now to see how another impossible victory changed history forever. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.